Letter 1. My dear Wormwood. So as a reminder, this is Screwtape, who is a head demon, writing letters to a demon in training named Wormwood, teaching him how to tempt humans. So my dear Wormwood, I know what you say about guiding your patient's reading and taking care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. So a few things here to note. Number one, the book just kind of dives into what appears to be a series of letters between Screwtape and Wormwood. We never hear from Wormwood's side. We just have Screwtape offering him advice. You'll also notice the phrase in the first sentence, your patient. So whenever a demon is assigned to a human to tempt, they refer to them as the patient. So I know what you say about guiding your patient's reading and taking care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. But are you not being a trifle naive? It sounds as if you suppose that argument was the way to keep him out of the enemy's clutches. That might have been so if he had lived a few centuries earlier. At that time, the humans still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not. And if it was proved, they really believed it. They still connected thinking with doing and were prepared to alter their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. But what with the weekly press and other such weapons, we have largely altered that. Here we have Screwtape telling Wormwood, hey, the best way to tempt humans is not through argument. And what he means by argument, he doesn't mean knockdown, drag out kind of fights. He means debates or discussions. Because if you are having a good debate or discussion, what is happening? You are hearing someone else's point of view. You are hearing a different side to things. And Screwtape says, we don't want that. We don't want someone to have a debate with a strong Christian, hear that side, and then think, oh, that actually makes sense. I want to pursue this. So he says, we don't want them to be arguing. Your man has been accustomed, ever since he was a boy, to have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together inside his head. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true or false, but as academic or practical, outworn or contemporary, conventional or ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Jargon is basically like a specialized language. So for example, if you play baseball, right, you have baseball jargon. You have a specialized language or terms, etc., that people who don't play baseball might not understand. And that can be applied to any area of life, right? If you are in finance, there are terms used in that job that people that don't have that job may not understand. If you're involved in cheerleading, right, there's terms used there that if you are not a cheerleader, you may not understand. So that's what jargon is. And here Screwtape tells Wormwood, jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Right? Jargon, the specialized language, these big words when it comes to theology, right? When you're talking about the Bible or Christianity, right? Use those complicated terms that someone who's not a Christian may not understand and befuddle them and make them think, oh, okay, I don't want to deal with this, right? Turn them towards that. Let them focus on that. Don't waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true. Make him think it is strong or stark or courageous. That is the philosophy of the future. That's the sort of thing he cares about, right? So direct them away from the truth. Here at the end of paragraph 1, Screwtape says the truth is not the thing people are most concerned about. So my question to you, if that is true, then what is it that Christians are concerned about? Okay, what are they tempted to prioritize over the truth at times? And then where do we see that in the church? The trouble about argument is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's own ground. He can argue too, whereas in really practical propaganda of the kind I am suggesting, he has been shown for centuries to be greatly inferior, or to be the greatly inferior of our Father below. Here we have two more terms that you need to flip your thinking on when it comes to the Screwtape letters. Whenever Screwtape talks about the enemy, he's talking about God. And whenever he talks about our Father, he's talking about Satan. So you have to flip your thinking, right? Because this is from a demon's point of view. Because normally in Christianity, right, when you say our Father, you're talking about God. When you're talking about the enemy, you're talking about Satan. But in this book, it is flipped. By the very act of arguing, you awake the patient's reason. And once it is awake, who can foresee the result? Even if a particular train of thought can be twisted so as to end in our favor, you will find that you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of attending to universal issues and withdrawing his attention from the stream of immediate sense experiences. Your business is to fix his attention on the stream. Teach him to call it real life, and don't let him ask what he means by real. Remember, he is not like you, a pure spirit. Never having been a human, oh, that abominable advantage of the enemies, meaning, Jesus came to earth, lived as a human. You don't realize how enslaved they are to the pressure of the ordinary. So here we are about to have an example from Screwtape about a patient he had once and how he subtly tempted this guy. I once had a patient, a sound atheist, who used to read in the British Museum. One day, as he sat reading, I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go the wrong way. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in a moment. Before I knew where I was, I saw my 20 years' work beginning to totter. If I had lost my head and begun to attempt a defense by argument, I should have been undone. But I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of the man which I had best under my control, and suggested that it was just about time he had some lunch. The enemy presumably made the counter-suggestion. You know how one can never quite overhear what he says to them? That this was more important than lunch. Here, Screwtape doesn't come out and say that God is more powerful than Satan and the devils, but that is what he's implying here, that he doesn't know what God's intentions are. He doesn't know what God says to the humans. But the enemy, God, presumably made the counter-suggestion that this was more important than lunch. At least I think that must have been his line, for when I said quite, in fact much too important to tackle at the end of a morning, the patient brightened up considerably, and by the time I had added much better come back after lunch and go into it with a fresh mind, he was already halfway to the door. Once he was in the streets, the battle was won. I showed him a newsboy shouting the midday paper and a number 73 bus going past, and before he had gone very far, I had got into him an unalterable conviction that, whatever odd ideas might come into a man's head when he was shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life, by which he meant the bus and the newsboy, was enough to show him that that sort of thing just couldn't be true. He knew he'd had a narrow escape, and in later years was fond of talking about that inarticulate sense or actuality, which is our ultimate safeguard against the aberrations of mere logic. He is now safe in our Father's house. This is an interesting instance for C.S. Lewis to start the Screwtape Letters off with, because I think a lot of times when we think about temptation, we think about, these massive scenarios of temptation where you're being tempted and you just make the wrong decision. But that's not always the case, right? Again, Satan is a deceiver. So he is sly, he is slick in how he tries to tempt us and steer us away from the Lord. So here, Screwtape one time had this patient that was sitting in the British Museum one day, and his thoughts start to drift towards Christianity. And so here comes Screwtape, and very slyly kind of nudges this guy's mind and says, you know what, this is a heavy topic. It's lunchtime. Maybe you should go get some lunch and then come back to this thought process afterwards. And that's what the guy does, but then he never ends up circling back around to the thoughts he was having before lunch. And so how often have you perhaps been in a conversation with someone and it was going really well, or you saw someone and you really wanted to reach out to them and have a conversation with them about the Lord, but then something distracts you and you think, okay, well, I'll come find them later. And you never do, right? Missed opportunity there. And so how often do we allow the little things in life to distract us from what's really important? You begin to see the point? Thanks to processes which we set at work in them centuries ago, they find it all but impossible to believe in the unfamiliar, while the familiar is before their eyes. Keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, the real sciences, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. There have been sad cases among the modern physicists. If he must dabble in science, keep him on economics and sociology. Don't let him get away from that invaluable real life. But the best of all is to let him read no science, but to give him a grand general idea that he knows it all and that everything he happens to have picked up in casual talk and reading is the results of modern investigation. Do remember that you are there to fuddle him, From the way some of you young fiends talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. What I really like about this last paragraph of the first letter is that he talks about science, and he says, right, above all, do not attempt to use science as a defense against Christianity, because I think in today's world so often we think of the sciences and we think of them trying to disprove Christianity and being against it. And yet Screwtape says, no, like that's not the case, because actually when you're studying science, right, you're thinking more abstractly and you're thinking about the world from a different point of view, and that can actually help Christianity. So we really don't want these humans to be dabbling too much into the sciences, which I thought was a really cool kind of statement to make.